You may be seated. All right, we're back on the record. You can proceed with the examination of Judge Morris.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Take the stand. You're still under oath.
Judge, you've heard the comparisons being made between the East Chicago City Court and the three courts of the other three municipalities. From your perspective as the judge of the East Chicago City Court, what type of people are you seeing coming before the court as far as their economic means?
We have a number of indigent defendants and many of the defendants who are at poverty level. I think the median income of the majority of the people in East Chicago is far less than our surrounding cities, especially Maryville and Cherryville. And so their ability to pay fines, fees, and costs are not the same.
Now, you said you have indigent people coming before the court. Was one of the things that you established after you became the judge was to have a public defender's fund where people who are using the public defender are required to pay money for a public defender's fund?
Yes, we established a public defender fund, and the fee is $50 for the services of the public defender. And sometimes it takes quite a while to retrieve that fee, or for some of the defendants to pay.
Well, when Mr. Bauer asked Dr. Bernard questions about revenue of the court, why don't you just fine everybody the maximum amount that the law allows if you find them guilty or if they plead guilty?
That is not appropriate in many cases, and we try to find ways to correct behavior. We want to rehabilitate. We do not want to bog defendants down with fees and fines and costs that we know they cannot pay, and if it's a part of a probation order, they may face revocation. We look at alternatives to sentencing, alternatives to fees and costs. As you know, there's an overcrowding in the jail, and therefore many of the defendants in the misdemeanor courts are really, as expressed to us with our meetings with the sheriff and the prosecutor, they're really not wanted there. Every week we receive a jail report to tell each of the city and town courts how many people you have in jail. They're overcrowding in the jail. I think they're using the space for the felony defendants more so than the city and town courts. So we've looked at alternatives of keeping them out of that jail by ordering for alcoholics, the alcohol counseling, for drug addiction, the narcotics counseling, for disorderly and resisting, a lot of community service ordered and psych evals with regional or addiction and family care or Fresh Start. We're finding alternatives to sentencing people or sending them directly to jail, especially those who can't post bond, and that's the majority of the people that come before me from the jail.
Well, you heard Mr. Bauer ask Dr. Bernard about all this money you have in probation. Why don't you just put everybody on probation and charge them probation fees?
The law does not allow, the statute does not allow, and the case law is quite clear that you're not going to use probation as a means of garnering monies for the court. You will not place everyone on probation just so that you can pay salaries in probation for your probation officers. is not allowed by statute, by case law.
We'll get back to the probation money after a bit. Now, as far as the number of cases that are filed in your court, or the criminal cases, the ordinance violations, the infractions, and the code violations, the misdemeanors, that kind of case. Do you as the judge have any control over how many cases are being filed in your court?
No, the officers will arrest, and the state and the deputy prosecutors, they will forward the information and request an order on those charges. So it's based on the arrest and the information behind each arrest.
Well, the number of criminal cases that are subject to your court's jurisdiction, the number of filings that are made in the East Chicago City Court, that has an impact on how much money the court generates by way of revenue. Am I correct in that regard?
Yes, if their court costs assessed, and for most cases, if there is a guilty or deferral, there are some court costs assessed.
Well, let me show you what has been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 13. And could you explain to the court what Exhibit 13 is, please?
Exhibit 13 is the annual court revenue that's reported to the state court administration for the year 2012.
You offered the evidence, Your Honor, Plaintiff's Exhibit 13.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, Exhibit 13 is admitted.
For the calendar year 2012, Judge Horace, can you go to the last page of the exhibit and read into the record, please, the total amount of money that the court generated for state-level funds, which would be the column to the left.
For state funds, $247,886.75.
And to the county level funds, what is that amount?
To county level funds, $60,894.50.
And to the city level funds?
To the city funds, $183,563.51.
Am I correct that the revenue that the court generated for the calendar year 2012, as indicated on Exhibit 13, is more than the revenue the court generated for the calendar year 2012?
Yes, to my...
What's your explanation for the fact that not you, but the court generated more money in 2013 than it did in 2012? Excuse me, I said that wrong. What's your explanation why the court generated more money in 2012 than it did in 2011?
My understanding is that we had an increase in the infraction tickets. And with that great increase in infraction tickets and city ordinance violations came an increase in cost that was paid into the clerk's office, into the county, the state, and the city. And that increase of ticketing is why we had an increase in cost or generated funds.
Now, the other jurisdiction that the East Chicago City Court has is civil filings. Could you explain to Judge Harris, please, the amount of civil filings that you're seeing in the East Chicago City Court?
And the court, as of today, we're seeing no civil filings in the Chicago City Court. A number of years back, the state court and the State Board of Accounts advised that the filing fee had increased on the types of cases that the city and towns could hear up to $141. At the time, other city and towns were still at a $79, $76 amount, and we felt it best if ordered or advised that the court fee would be $140 or more, that's what we would charge. And we were told by two of the persons that filed all of their cases in East Chicago City Court that they would no longer be filing with us and that they would move to Hammond and other locations where the filing fees were less.
Now, Mr. Bauer, in his opening statement, talked about probation fees and how much money you had in your probation fee budget at the end of 2012. How much money do you generate on a yearly basis for probation fees, just round numbers?
Average maybe 17 to 19,000 a year, maybe 17 to 19.
So the money that you had in your probation fees that were funds available to the court, those had accumulated over a number of years, is that correct?
Yes, over the last 8 years.
How do you use those probation fees in the court budget? What do you allocate those for?
We allocate for most of the operational expenses of the court. As you know, the probation department is the largest department of the court. They generate all of the paper and the copiers and all of the other tools that are used, including booklets and pens and markers, court cards generated by the probation department. So along with the training, mandatory 2 trainings out of the year, all of that comes out of the probation fund. As a matter of fact, for 2013, most of all of the operation expenses of the Chicago City Court have come from probation and not the general fund.
And as you said, is that because the probation department or the probation personnel use most of the copiers, paper, and the things that you're allocating the funds to?
Yes.
Mr. Bauer said in an opening statement that he couldn't understand, or the council couldn't understand, why you just didn't appropriate $65,000 from the $80,000 from the probation fund to put it for payment of the salaries of the probation officials.
This is quite clear in state statute and case law that the probation funds are used for the expenses of probation, but not for salaries. You can use the probation funds to shore up a probation officer, and we have 2 salaries if this city does not have the money. In this case, it's not the city does not have the money. It was just an arbitrary decision by the council. One afternoon, the council chair stepped down as chairman, and one of the other members stood up so that she could make a motion to reduce the budget by 10% for no other reason than they could. Not as if they could not afford it, and then we could not move all $65,000 or $80,000 from probation into the salaries for all of the employees. This is not legal.
As far as the amount of money that you need to fund the court for the balance of the calendar year 2013, what is that amount of money according to the Comptroller's Office?
According to the Comptroller's Office, it's approximately $65,000.
In your opinion, as the judge of the East Chicago City Court, is that $65,000 necessary for the proper operation of the court?
Yes.
Do you think that, not do you think, in your opinion, is your request for $65,000 for salaries for the balance of the calendar year 2013 an extravagant request?
It has never been for the last 5 years. We have not been extravagant. We're not a big show. We are a court that's operating effectively and efficiently. That's our only goal. Our goal is not to judge the city for funds. It's simply to operate for the safety of our community. We have no other goal.
Well, you heard Mr. Bauer say that they're trying to reduce the budget in East Chicago, the overall budget. Have you had an opportunity to listen to Mayor Copeland this year talk about the fiscal state of the city of East Chicago?
Yes, I was sitting in a meeting 2 months ago at St. Mark Church where he advised the community, and it was a meeting on safety, public safety. The sheriff was there, the chief of police, the prosecutor. It's a community forum where he advised that we were fiscally sound, that we were sound so that we could now pay the policemen to work overtime. We have the funds, and members were complaining how their community, especially the West Calumet community, were not receiving the same services as the other communities. But he advised them that the officers would be out, that they're paying them overtime, and that if they fail to protect the citizens, that they would not be allowed the overtime payment, and they would be removed from this extra shift.
And you mentioned earlier that your employees were put on furlough. Could you explain how that furlough situation worked, Ron?
For over 5 years or so, there was a 10% reduction in our payroll. So when you calculate the amount of salaries for all of the employees, and after they calculated the fringe, there was a 10% reduction in that total amount. And so we agreed that if the city was in dire straits, that we would also go on furlough. We were then told earlier this year that the police were off for furlough, police and fire, and that in a couple months we would be, and on the beginning of August, we were off for furlough.
Is the city of East Chicago beginning to employ more people during the calendar year 2013?
They're advertising in emails that we receive for employment. I saw at least 30 positions that were open, or at least available in the city. And that's through emails from the personnel office. So they're advertising for employees.
I believe that's all the questions I have.
Cross-examination.
Judge Morris, Attorney Steve Bauer. Have you had an opportunity to review Carl Sinder's analysis for the Common Council?
Yes.
And you've gone over that reviewed it with your staff?
Not with my staff.
Okay. Without specifically touching on figures, would you agree with me that the number of cases disposed of in the East Chicago City Court has been lower every year than what was taken care of in Hobart, Maryville, and Cherville?
I do not have that number in front of me, so I could not agree without seeing the numbers.
All right. Would that surprise you if the statistics show that?
No, it wouldn't surprise me because our cases remain open until you're able to pay your fees and costs. They go into 2 or 3, 4 years, 5 until we determine that there's an indigency request that the probation would make or the state would say they would like it dismissed due to that indigency.
Would you agree with me that the statistics show in 2009, in 2010, and 2011 that you had about 4,000 open cases in East Chicago?
I would have to see that statistic.
That information was contained in Mr. Cinder's report, wasn't it?
I am not sure. I reviewed 4 pages that were highlighted, a brief section of Mr. Cinder's report.
And that during those same 3 years, in Maryville, the number of pending cases at the first of each of the year of 09, 10, and 11, 17,867, 19,561, and 14,765.
I could not agree without seeing the numbers.
Okay. Of course, you don't have a civil docket. You don't have a civil docket, correct?
Well, the cases come, many of them have been pending for 10, 11, 12 years. So on Tuesday and Thursday, we do have a call if the attorneys want to come in because their collection practices have failed. They want to generate garnishment orders, or they want to satisfy those cases. But there has maybe been 5 to 7 filings, but these are just ongoing cases.
Maryville, for a number of years, maintained a civil docket. You're aware of that. You're not aware of that. Have you talked to Judge Jones about her
I
docket?
talked to Judge Jones on Saturday, and until I saw a report on Monday, I did not discuss a civil docket with her. We discussed the other aspects of the Maryville Town Court.
You saw Mr. Cinder's report. Did you see his comparison of the cost per case among East Chicago, Maryville, Schererville, and Hobart?
I may have seen that.
Okay. And without rolling in the expenses for a clerk, your cost per case disposed of was twice as high as the average in any of the other 3. Would you agree with that?
I would have to see it to agree.
Do you disagree with that?
I can't agree or disagree because you're talking to me about numbers that I do not see in Mr. Cinder's report. I know it's based on what's being reported to the state. And like I said, I took a look at only a section of it because it kind of went on and on.
So if I were to represent to you that that was one of his findings and it's in his report, as you sit there today, you can't disagree with that.
I can't disagree that he found it. As I shared with my attorney, that the numbers are reported, or at one point I thought they were being reported somewhat differently as to the number of cases by the city and towns. Meaning, at one point, per case, if you had 3 charges, they were counted, 1, 2, 3, and then it was told that its per case number should be 1 per person. So if I'm Sonia Morris and I'm arrested for resisting and disorderly, that should be 1 case, not 2. So there had been some discrepancies in the count.
So you're saying that the information that's contained in the gateway at the state, through the state, as to the amount of cases that were disposed of in Hobart, Maryville, and Cherryville is skewed because they're counting as a disposed case separate counts in charges?
I'm simply saying that I am not aware of how they were counting, and if that's the information that he has, he's based on that information, but it was my impression at one point that the counts were different. I know in Chicago that they have been counting one case, one person on one charge with 3 different case numbers.
Well, Judge, what I'm asking you, you prepared with your attorney today to come in and justify your budget. You were aware of a comparison that the council had asked Mr. Cinder to do? You weren't?
I'm going to say he submitted it to my counsel.
That's correct.
Okay.
You filed a discovery request for him.
Yes, after my counsel did that.
Well, did he just do that on his own without your knowledge?
No, he advised me that he would be requesting a comparison report.
I see that you've got a law clerk also that's in your budget.
Yes.
What does the law clerk do for you?
Initially, the law clerk did all of the research that I needed to run the court. I arrived at East Chicago in 2004, and a lot of things had been going on in 2003, which then meant I needed a lot of research as to whether or not these things were legal. After a while, in my repeated calls and conversations with the state court administrator and the state board of accounts on a myriad of issues that were going on with the Chicago City Court and our litigation, I then asked, because of my connections in the city, my relationships in the city, that this law clerk not only do research, but sit at least twice a month on the first Mondays and the last Thursdays. Why? So that those persons, I could recuse myself, and a number of people who had some sort of relationship to me could still come to the Chicago City Court but not have to be transferred to other areas. And then I like to say it gives some people a break also for me.
And so you really use Lonnie Randolph as a pro tem?
Yes.
No problem with that, is there? Even though he's identified as a law clerk?
Absolutely.
You've got another pro tem, don't you?
Referee Elizabeth Zuckers.
What does a referee do, please?
Okay. Initially, she was on the Tuesday and Thursday call for the civil call. She then moved to Friday, and that's to hear all of the cases which were infractions and violations of city ordinance. We have every Friday with over sometimes 200 cases of infractions and violations of city ordinance, and so she's designated for the civil call and the infractions.
And is part of your explanation as the reason why your income to the court or from the court fines for the city is low is because most of the people coming in there are poor?
One is the number of cases that we have that come in. 2, we determine whether or not if you have your failure to have your registration or a light bulb out or some of these things that are associated with your automobile. If you come in with the correct documents or repairs, the state dismisses those actions. And then thirdly, we then have the number of cases that the police bring. We don't throw any cases away. If the officers bring them to us, then those are the cases we hear. And most cases have court costs assessed, and if they have the appropriate records, there are no fines assessed, they're deferred, they may be driving school. Some of the young people we ask to write us essays as opposed to fining them.
Judge, would you acknowledge or do you admit that the filings in the East Chicago City Court are much less than what's in Cherryville, Hobart, and Maryville?
According to that report, yes. I'll advise that I've never done an independent report on the court revenues and budgets for any of the city and town courts. It was just my impression that they were all functioning effectively and efficiently.
All right, that's not the question. I said, you realize that your filings are less that are in those other 3 courts that I mentioned.
That the officers are bringing less cases?
Well, I'm not just talking officers. There's all kinds of people that can file. You've got code enforcement people that can file. You've got building. You've got all kinds of things that can be filed. Do you acknowledge to the court now that your filings are less than what there are in these neighboring towns and cities?
If the report says that.
And the number of your disposed cases are much less. Would you agree or disagree?
If that report says it.
Judge Morris, you were talking about Anthony Copeland making public statements that the city was in good financial condition. You testified about that.
Yes, I was present.
Okay. When did that happen?
That happened at St. Margaret Church.
No, not where, when.
I'm thinking it was either the end of July or sometime in July. There was and it's public record, a
Judge, what I asked was when. So in July 2013, Mayor Copeland, who was not a member of the Chicago Common Council, made a public statement that the city was in good financial condition.
Yes.
At that time, is it not a fact, Judge Morris, that the tax freeze had gone off?
Oh, I don't know.
Is it not a fact also that at that time the county had passed a gross income tax that allocated about a 0.25% for public safety?
I don't know.
So do you have any knowledge as to the reason why at the end of July 2013, Mayor Copeland would announce that the city was going to be in better financial condition?
He did state that he had received money from gaming. This is what he stated to the residents. I'm sitting in the audience that he received money from gaming, and that financially sound.
And in fact, if I recall correctly, that money that came from you refer to gaming, was that not the $320,000 that was returned by the Attorney General as a result of this RICO suit that had been pending for 6 years against Pastrick and others?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know, in fact, that the city did receive a check for $320,000 during the summer as a result of the RICO litigation that had been pending for almost 7 years?
No, I thought they were talking about billions of dollars.
Are you also aware that in the fall of 2012, when the council proposed to, or did in fact, reduce your budget by around 10%, at that time, the tax freeze was still in place in the county?
No, I wasn't aware.
Were you aware that at that time, the 1-2-3% cap on real estate taxes was also being applied?
Yes.
Were you aware that at that time that the city was involved in substantial litigation with Ameristar about their assessment and the amount of taxes that they had paid?
No.
Were you aware also that the Gaming Commission, about 6 months earlier, had resolved pending disputes that have been down there for almost 4 years with a reduction in the percentage as to what the city was to receive from Ameristar?
No.
Would you also, or were you aware that in the fall of 2012, when the cut in your budget took place, that the tax revenue collection percentage in the city of East Chicago, as a result of the economic turndown, had decreased substantially?
No.
Judge, you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that those are factors that would be considered by the council when they're adopting budgets?
No.
They wouldn't consider that.
I wouldn't agree that this council considered that.
All right. Well, I'll violate all the rules and ask an open-ended question. If they were not considering all of those financial pressures on the city, what were they considering?
Actually, I thought they were just considering how to defeat the court, to undermine the court. Yes, open-ended question. I said in a deposition of the then council chair, and she seemed to have no idea how the budget was being run, and advised that simply the paperwork that was put before them is what she voted for.
You're talking about the deposition of Gilda Orange.
Yes. I was surprised.
And in fact, during that deposition, didn't Gilda Orange indicate that in the previous budget discussion concerning the court, there were a couple of council people that expressed opinions that the cost of running the East Chicago City Court was much higher than some of the courts neighboring them, neighboring you?
No.
You heard Miss Orange say that?
I heard her say that there were no conversations with regards to the court's budget in the previous budget hearings. I did hear her then say that after this suit began, that a number of the council people started to do research comparing our courts to the other courts, not one time prior to that. I also heard her say that whatever the comptroller's office and the budget advisors put before them is what they voted on, and then say that some persons were no longer their advisors as a result. But she failed to say that the comptroller had died. And those are the things I heard her say. That's why I was surprised.
Judge, it's my understanding you're going to have the deposition of Gilda Orange, who was a council person provided to you. Judge Morris, where do you live?
In Chicago.
And what's your address, please?
4435 Lane of the Roses.
And how close is that to the court?
I don't know.
Well, 4 miles, 5 miles?
It's 2 streets or 3 or 4 streets over. Or 5.
And do you know what the address of your court is in East Chicago?
2301 East Columbus Drive.
Do you hold court any other place other than that address?
No.
And you live, what, approximately 4 blocks away?
4 or 5, yes.
Have you been provided with a city car?
Absolutely.
And do you drive that other than from your home to the court?
Yes, I drive the car. I drive it to pin parades. I drive it to offices. I drive it to meetings. I drive it to just about everywhere.
Do you use that as your personal automobile?
I have a personal automobile.
That's not what I asked, Judge. I asked, do you use that as your personal automobile?
I use it more than my personal automobile, but I have a personal automobile. Matter of fact, I have 2 personal automobiles.
What vehicle did you receive and when did you receive it?
In 2004, I received a Eddie Bauer Ford Explorer. I received that after forcing the mayor and his group. I asked them whether they were hiding the vehicle that they purchased the year before, 2003 Black Explorer. Asked them had they hidden it because it was there at the court when Mr. Fontanez was there. I asked, was it because I was black or was it because I was female that they were hiding this vehicle?
Which I didn't ask, but, so when you came on board as judge in January of 2004, you received this automobile.
I asked for the black automobile that had been associated
I
with
asked,
the court.
did you receive the automobile?
Yes,
And have you driven that same car the entire time?
from 2004 to 2013, the same green truck, yes.
And how many miles does it have on it now?
It now has 100,000 miles.
How about 117,000?
Okay, I can look up there.
Do you file any information with the controller about how much you use the vehicle?
The controller's never asked how much I use the vehicle.
I didn't ask what the controller asked you. I asked if you filed any information as to the extent of your use of the vehicle with the controller.
The controller has never.
I
No,
didn't ask what the controller asked you. I'm asking you, did you provide the controller with any information as to the amount of usage that you've made of the vehicle?
no,
And you receive a W-2
yes,
as additional compensation for the vehicle, correct?
no.
Okay, what did you receive a W-2 for?
I'm sorry.
You have wages, you have a salary from the
Yes.
city.
Yes,
Do you also receive either a 1099 or some type of W-2 for your personal use of the city-owned vehicle?
no.
Judge Morris, what authority do you know that warrants a city court judge to have a city-owned vehicle?
What authority?
Yes, what legal authority is there?
I have never researched that.
Be a good job for Lonnie to do, wouldn't it?
Oh, John.
Judge Morris, will you acknowledge that there is a dispute or question as to whether or not the funds in the adult probation fund can be used for probation services?
No,
Okay, they cannot be used for probation services.
there's no dispute.
Okay,
Yes, would I acknowledge that there's a dispute? I said, no.
there is no dispute that they cannot be used for probation services.
They can be used for probation services.
Okay, and what's your definition of probation services?
My definition of probation services is all of the things that the probation office need, all of their training for our probation officers, all of their supplies, the computers, the copiers, the papers, the dockets, the books that they keep all of their record in. Those are the services
But they
at
cannot,
probation.
in your opinion, they cannot be used for the payment of a probationer salary.
According to the statute, no. That
That's,
they can be used to supplement that salary if the city cannot afford to do so.
and so it's your position then that because the city has got gaming funds that they can use to pay the probation officers' salaries, they can't be used for probation officers' salaries.
Yes. But I'm not sure where the city has its funds from. It's never been my impression that the city were in any lack of funds. It's just simply an arbitrary move by the council.
So you think. In truth and fact, you've got over $150,000 in that particular fund.
Somewhere near there.
And I think at the end of August of this year, it was almost $160,000.
I wouldn't know my probation chief this week.
How about the funds in your city court programs?
The driving school and the public defender fund.
There was a substantial, well, a good amount of money in that particular fund. I'm talking about the budgeted funds that you have got for your court programs.
I recall the driving school that there was 40,000 budgeted, but it was not that amount in there because I looked at a document from the controller's office that said it would be a negative amount if we use those amounts.
I'm talking about your court programs, not your driving fund.
Driving school and first and public defender fund are the court programs. Those are what's considered our court programs, along with probation. When we appropriate funds, we have the general fund, and then we appropriate those three as court programs.
So in truth and fact, Judge, so that Judge Parris understands this, you have one large fund that I call the general court fund, out of which almost all the salaries and many of the expenses are paid. That's the one that's about $800,000 a year.
No.
No. Okay, you don't have that fund.
No, not all of the court programs are paid. The general fund is now just about salaries only, and then we have our court programs where the operation expenses, all of our supplies are coming out of.
You have got a general court fund that's got 100 line items for personal services and fringe benefits. It's got line items for a 200 series, a 300 series, and a 400 series. Most of that is supplies and other expenses of the court. You're not using it. You're paying all of those expenses out of the other two funds?
Yes, except for the telephone and the postage, because we never receive a receipt for those.
So do you have leftover monies? See, you need to explain this to me, if you can. It looks to me as if many of your, I call them non-wages operating expenses, are being shipped to these two accounts. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how much then additional available do you have in your 200, 300, and 400 line items in your general budget?
I would need to take a look to see.
But you do have funds that are available there.
There may be, at this point, funds available only because, like I said, the phone and the gasoline is something we have little to no control over. We have items for, I think, our books or something like that may be on the general fund that we're using, but outside of that, no.
You had $3,000 in your budget for gasoline and $4,000 for the telephone?
It may be. I don't know. I don't recall.
And the gasoline is for what?
All of the vehicles we have, all of our bailiffs deliver summonses from Lake County to St. John, from East Chicago to St. John to Gary, over to Hobart and Dyer, all over the county. And that the gasoline is used for all of the vehicles, including every now and then the court's vehicle, the vehicle that I operate.
Judge Morris, just a couple more things. You will acknowledge, won't you, that over the last 3 years, there has been a substantial reduction in the amount of city employees.
I don't know.
Judge, that's all that I have.
You redirect?
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge Morris. You may step down, ma'am. Thank you. Get more.
I'd like to, I don't have an extra copy of this, Your Honor, for Mr. Bauer, but I assume he has it. I'd like to publish the deposition of Governor Orange.
Okay.
And then, as we discussed, the redraft.
I'll read it. Why don't we take a 10-minute recess? All right. All rise.